happened here, beyond the immediate policy questions of what could have happened and how the law was strengthened today. I think the other thing that happened here, big picture, is that we now know, basically for sure, about what is going to be a huge part of the legacy of the presidency of Barack Obama. We know a lot more about how consequential his presidency will be seen in the long run of history. And yes, he is and always will be our nation's first African-American president. He is and always will be the president who had to catch the country mid-plummet into economic freefall and put us back on track. He will always be the president who got Osama bin Laden. He will always be the president who let gay people serve in the military. He will always be the president who rescued General Motors and Chrysler. All true. But put him on the board, man. Put him on the board for having done what generations of Democratic presidents tried to do before him but failed. I mean, it was FDR who did Social Security in the 1930s, and that took extreme poverty off the table for the elderly in America forever. It was LBJ who did Medicare in the 1960s, which is one of the most popular and successful large-scale government programs of any kind anywhere in the world, and which has meant that every single person in this country who has the good fortune to grow old does so with the ironclad expectation that they will have health coverage for their health needs in their old age. And on that number line, you can put Barack Obama, who has not just done it, but who has seen to it now that it will not be undone, who moved heaven and earth to pass this thing in the first place, and he paid huge political costs for it, both in Congress and in terms of everything else he couldn't do because he did this. But on this, he succeeded where every previous Democrat for half a century has failed before him, to substantively change the enormous system by which we treat the sick and have our babies and set our broken bones and prevent our cancers and get our shots in this country. Substantively change that system so that everybody can get care. He didn't build a whole new system. He elected instead to just fix the old one. And it definitely needs still a lot more fixing. But the number of uninsured American families has finally not just stopped rising, it's fallen off a cliff. The costs of healthcare have finally started to slow down. I know, you know, we all know people who have health insurance now because of this law, who previously were covered only by prayer and good luck and wearing your seatbelt and hoping it was true that the emergency room really couldn't turn you away if worse came to worse, and that is where you had to turn up. We all know people who have coverage now who didn't have it before, who only have it now because of this law. Two major tests of Obamacare at the Supreme Court, both of them surprise victories. This one today, not just 5-4 like the first one, but 6-3. This one today, unapologetic and assertive that this is the healthcare system of the United States of America now. And there has to be a good reason, not just a trick or a glitch or a typo or a gotcha that you can use as an excuse to tear it down. From the ruling, Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them. We must interpret the act in a way that is consistent with the former and avoids the latter. Twice now, the Supreme Court has taken up these tests of President Obama's signature legislative achievement. Twice now, he has passed those tests. And as I see it, at least, looking at the pipeline of all the cases that are out there, all the legal strategies that are out there from the Republicans to try to tear this thing down, it looks like there's not going to be another one of these tests at the Supreme Court, at least while President Obama is still in office. And so, yeah, this is a huge deal. This is a huge day. And as policy, there is further to go to make the health system work better and to get more people covered. But as a political achievement, as something that president after president after president has tried and failed to do, Barack Obama, we now know, did it. This is signed, sealed, and delivered. He did it. We know a lot more today about what history will say about Barack Obama as president of the United States than we did before this surprise ruling today in Washington. This surprise ruling that proved all of the doom and gloom naysayers wrong. So very, very, very wrong. Joining us now is Michael Beschloss, NBC News' presidential historian. Mr. Beschloss, Michael, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Same here. Thank you, Rachel.
So I as you can tell from my introduction, I think this is a very big deal.
I got that idea.
Yeah, in historical terms, I mean, how significant is this ruling for his legacy? How do you think historians will explain the importance of this today?
I completely agree with you. Assuming, Rachel, that over the long run, the health care law by Barack Obama does what it was supposed to, and assuming that some future Congress and president don't repeal it, this is going to be probably in the first sentence of what historians write about Barack Obama, and it really vindicates a big decision he made in his first term. As you remember, a lot of people around him said, we know that you, during the campaign, said you were going to try to bring universal health care, but, there's a huge economic crisis, the worst since the 1930s. Do this at the beginning of your second term. Don't spend the political capital now. Instead, he said, I may not have this kind of Democratic Congress ever again. I'm going to try this in my first and second year, which he did, and it worked. And in retrospect, had he waited, he might still have lost Congress, and this would have been impossible.
Right. And so I think that's very helpful in terms of understanding this as a matter of presidential decision-making and prioritizing.
It matters who's president.
Yes, it very much matters who's president, and it matters whose advice he takes and whose advice he rejects.
Right.
In terms of comparing him with other presidencies, and I put him on that number line a little bit self-consciously with, FDR and Social Security and LBJ and Medicare. Is there a parallel here in terms of the fight, in terms of how hard a fight it was to get those things, how hard Republicans contemporaneously fought against those things?
Oh, sure. And I think, each case is always different, but FDR in the mid-1930s fighting for Social Security, it was said to be socialistic, and once it passed, people said either the Supreme Court will repeal it or some future Congress will. By the early 1950s, many Republicans were still saying, repeal Social Security. Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president around 1954, wrote a letter to his very conservative brother saying, these people who talk about repealing Social Security, if a Republican president did that, he would be the head of a party that soon would very soon not exist. Lyndon Johnson, the same thing with Medicare in 1965. But the test of all this was that these programs worked, and now history will show whether this one does.
I feel like we're getting to a point in the Obama presidency, and maybe it's these big things happening. Maybe it's just the passage of time. But I feel like we can start to sketch out what his impact has been, big terms, like what he has changed, not just in terms of policy, but also in terms of politics. Do you feel like you can start to see the way that he has changed Democratic politics or the overall left-right direction of the country?
Take a look at the language within the Democratic Party right now. It's much further to the left than it was in the 1990s or even in 2008. That is, to some extent, the effect of a president moving gently the Democratic Party to the left.
NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss, it's great to have you here, sir. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Me too. Thank you, Rachel.